For 23 years, I scrubbed the floors of the Patterson family mansion, believing I was nothing but an unwanted, disposable servant. I believed the vicious lies they fed me, that I was worthless, that I was a burden, and that my only purpose on this earth was to clean up after them. That was until a team of FBI agents kicked down the doors of a billionaire's estate, slapped handcuffs on the people I called my parents, and officially charged them with human trafficking and child endangerment. As my mother sobbed hysterically on the Persian rug, and my father was shoved against the wall by federal agents, the absolute, mind-blowing truth finally came out. I wasn't born to be their slave. I was the kidnapped heir to a $12 million fortune. And the billionaire whose daughter my brother was about to marry was actually my biological uncle. Before I rewind the clock and tell you the insane story of how a single wedding photograph unraveled a 2-decade-old cold case and utterly destroyed the monsters who stole my life, please do me a massive favor. If you love stories about ultimate karma and surviving toxic abuse, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us out. Also, drop a comment below letting me know exactly where you're watching from and what your local time is right now. I love seeing how far around the world this community reaches. Now, let's get into it. My name is Lily, and I am 23 years old. To understand how I ended up standing in a room full of FBI agents, you have to understand the absolute nightmare I lived in every single day leading up to that moment. We lived in a massive, 2-story colonial in Fairfield County, Connecticut. It was the kind of ultra-wealthy neighborhood where every lawn was perfectly manicured, every family drove European luxury cars, and our neighbors were hedge fund managers and prominent surgeons. From the outside, the Patterson household looked like the absolute pinnacle of the American dream. But from the inside, it was my own personal prison. My bedroom wasn't a bedroom at all. I lived in the unfinished concrete basement. There were no windows, no drywall, and no heat. I slept on a thin, stained mattress that smelled faintly of mildew, positioned just 3 feet away from the humming furnace. In the winter, that roaring machine was the only warmth I had. In the summer, the basement was suffocatingly hot and damp. Every single morning, without fail, my alarm would ring at 5:00 a.m. By 5:15, I was upstairs in the pristine kitchen, scrubbing the granite countertops, preheating the Viking stove, and pulling eggs and bacon from the massive Sub-Zero refrigerator. I knew every single gray vein in their Italian marble island because I polished it daily until my hands were raw. Mr. Patterson would come down around 7:00 a.m., his Wall Street Journal tucked firmly under his arm, an expensive Tag Heuer watch glinting on his wrist. He would settle into his plush leather armchair in the breakfast nook, never once bothering to make eye contact with me. "Is it done, Lily?" he would ask, his eyes already scanning the morning headlines. "Yes, Mr. Patterson," I would reply. That was the absolute extent of our daily conversations. 23 years of cold commands and monosyllables. I would set his plate on the table, using the good Wedgwood china with the silver rim, and silently retreat back to the kitchen. My place was never at that beautiful mahogany table. My place was standing by the sink, quickly eating whatever scraps were left over after the family had finished their meals. The physical labor was exhausting, but it was the glaring, suffocating contrast between myself and my brother, Chase, that truly broke my spirit. Chase's bedroom was on the 2nd floor, a massive corner suite with bay windows overlooking the lush gardens. He had a 65-inch flat-screen TV mounted on the wall, the latest gaming consoles, and a walk-in closet bigger than my entire basement. He attended an elite private prep school that cost $45,000 a year. Meanwhile, I was entirely homeschooled, which was the lie Mrs. Patterson told the nosy neighbors. The truth was, no one taught me a thing. I taught myself how to read using old magazines Mrs. Patterson threw in the trash, and I learned basic math by counting out grocery change. When Chase turned 18, Mr. Patterson handed him the keys to a brand new white BMW. Chase had an American Express Platinum card with no limit. He bought sneakers that cost more money than I had ever touched in my entire life. I, on the other hand, owned exactly 3 dresses, all faded hand-me-downs from Mrs. Patterson that I had to alter myself with a needle and thread. Once, when I was 15 years old, the agonizing unfairness of it all bubbled over. Mrs. Patterson was lounging in the living room, flipping through a high-end catalog. I had just finished mopping the hardwood floors, my knees aching and my hands stinging from the harsh bleach. "Mrs. Patterson," I asked quietly, wringing out the mop. "Why am I different from Chase? Why does he get to go to school? Why does he get to sit at the table, and I don't?" She slowly lowered the catalog. Her eyes, cold, flat, and completely devoid of empathy, met mine. "Because Lily," she said, her voice as sharp as broken glass, "some children are born to be loved, and some children are born to serve. You are the second kind. That is your purpose. That is your fate. Don't ever question it again." She went back to her catalog, and I went back to the basement, internalizing the vicious lie that I was simply born to be a slave. I accepted my dark fate. I had no idea that a few years later, Chase's engagement to a billionaire's daughter would trigger a chain of events that would rip the Patterson family's dark secrets completely wide open. To survive in the Patterson household, I had to learn how to make myself invisible. For years, I believed that if I scrubbed hard enough, stayed quiet enough, and demanded absolutely nothing, the crushing weight of my reality would somehow feel a little lighter. But the physical labor, the blistered hands, the aching back, the suffocating heat of the basement, was never the true nightmare. The real torture was the psychological warfare. It was the daily, agonizing reminder that I was breathing the same air as a family that viewed me as less than human. To truly understand how deep the rot of favoritism went in that house, I have to take you back to a Tuesday evening 5 years ago. I was 18 years old, and for a brief, foolish moment, I actually believed I could escape my fate. Because I wasn't allowed to attend high school, I had spent my teenage years hoarding whatever educational scraps I could find. When the Pattersons threw away Chase's old textbooks because he didn't need them to pass, I smuggled them down into the basement. I spent countless nights sitting on my mildewed mattress under the glow of a single, flickering bare bulb, teaching myself biology, algebra, and history. I saved every stray coin I found in the couch cushions or the laundry until I had enough to secretly take the GED exam. I passed in the 99th percentile. With that certificate in hand, I applied for a local community college nursing program. It was a modest dream, but to me, it was a lifeline. It was a ticket out of the basement. The day the acceptance letter arrived, my heart was hammering so wildly against my ribs I thought it might crack my chest open. The tuition was shockingly low, just a few $1,000s a semester. I didn't have a dime to my name, but I naively thought that if I showed the Pattersons my acceptance letter, if I proved to them how hard I had worked entirely on my own, they would see my potential. I wasn't asking for a handout. I was prepared to beg for a loan. I promised myself I would scrub their floors for another decade if they just co-signed the paperwork so I could go to class. I walked up the grand staircase and approached Mr. Patterson's mahogany-lined study. The door was slightly ajar, and I could hear laughter echoing from inside. I peeked through the crack and saw Chase lounging on the leather Chesterfield sofa, his feet propped carelessly on an antique coffee table. He was holding a glossy travel brochure. "Come on, Dad, everyone is going to Ibiza for the summer," Chase whined, tossing the brochure onto the desk. "It's only 25 grand for the villa rental. Plus, I need a new watch before I go. The Rolex you bought me for graduation is already feeling a little dated." Chase had graduated high school by the skin of his teeth, heavily relying on expensive private tutors that Mr. Patterson paid thousands of dollars to essentially take his tests for him. He hadn't worked a single day in his life. He hadn't even applied to college yet, claiming he needed a gap year to find himself. "Mr. Patterson chuckled warmly, leaning back in his executive chair and pulling out his pristine checkbook. All right, son. Consider it a reward for finishing high school. But you better bring me back a nice bottle of scotch from Spain. And take my platinum card for the watch. Just keep it under 15,000, understand? You're the best, Dad. Chase cheered, snatching the black card from his father's hand. I stood in the hallway, clutching my thin, paper acceptance letter. My tuition for the entire year was less than a third of what Chase was about to spend on a luxury watch. Taking a deep, trembling breath, I pushed the door open. The warm, jovial atmosphere in the room evaporated the absolute second I stepped across the threshold. Mr. Patterson's smile vanished, replaced by a deep, irritated scowl. "What is it, Lily?" he snapped. "Are the floors not finished?" "The floors are done, sir," I said, my voice shaking. I stepped forward, holding out the crumpled envelope like a peace offering. I have something to show you. I took the GED exam, I passed, and I just got accepted into the nursing program at the community college. Chase let out a loud, mocking snort, covering his mouth to stifle his laughter. Mr. Patterson didn't laugh. He just stared at the envelope in my trembling hand as if it were covered in toxic waste. He didn't reach out to take it. "The tuition is $4,000, I pleaded, the desperation bleeding into my voice. "I know it's a lot, but I'll pay you back every single penny. I'll take on more chores. I'll work night shifts at the hospital and hand my paychecks directly to you. I just need a cosigner, please. I want to make something of my life." Mrs. Patterson, who had been walking down the hallway, stepped into the study behind me. She assessed the situation in a matter of seconds, her eyes darting from my desperate face to the acceptance letter and finally to her husband. "Make something of your life," Mrs. Patterson repeated, her voice dripping with venomous amusement. She walked past me, intentionally bumping my shoulder, and stood beside her husband. "Lily, what kind of delusions are you entertaining down in that basement?" "It's not a delusion," I whispered, tears finally welling in my eyes. "I just want to go to school." "You just gave Chase $40,000 for a vacation and a watch. Please, I just want an education." Mr. Patterson slammed his fist down on the desk, the sound echoing like a gunshot. I flinched violently. "Do not ever compare yourself to my son," he roared, his face turning a dangerous shade of crimson. "Chase carries the Patterson name. He is building a legacy. He is our blood, our pride, and our future. You are absolutely nothing. You are a charity case we took pity on, and you have the audacity to walk into my office and demand my hard-earned money." "I wasn't demanding," I choked out. "Listen to me very carefully," Mrs. Patterson interrupted, stepping so close to me I could smell her expensive Chanel perfume. Her eyes were devoid of any human warmth. "We don't invest in the help. Your education is a waste of time and a waste of our money. You are not smart. You are not special. The only reason you are allowed to breathe the air in this house is to make our lives easier. If you ever bring this up again, or if I catch you slacking on your chores to read another textbook, I will throw you out on the street with absolutely nothing. And trust me, Lily, a girl with no ID, no money, and no family doesn't last long out there." She snatched the acceptance letter from my hand. Without breaking eye contact, she ripped it cleanly in half, and then in half again, letting the pieces flutter to the pristine hardwood floor I had just polished. "Now clean up this mess," she commanded coldly, "and get out of our sight." Chase smirked, twirling the platinum credit card between his fingers. I dropped to my knees on the floor, the tears finally spilling over my cheeks, and gathered the shredded pieces of my only hope. That night, lying on my mildewed mattress, something inside of me permanently broke. I realized that my obedience would never buy my freedom. They didn't just want my labor, they wanted my absolute submission. They wanted me to believe that I was a secondary, disposable creature who existed solely to elevate their golden child. I buried the pieces of my acceptance letter at the bottom of my only drawer, and with it, I buried my hope of ever having a normal life. For the next 5 years, I moved through that house like a ghost. I scrubbed, I cooked, I polished, and I stayed entirely invisible. But then, Chase met Victoria Whitmore. When the wedding was announced, the house descended into a frantic, chaotic frenzy of luxury and excess. The Pattersons were desperate to impress the billionaire Whitmore family. $200,000 was casually thrown around for floral arrangements and 5-tier cakes. I spent 6 months helping to prepare everything, polishing the silver, addressing the embossed invitations, picking up the dry cleaning. For a brief, foolish moment, I thought that maybe, just maybe, I would be allowed to attend the ceremony. Not as a bridesmaid, but just as a quiet guest sitting in the back row. Instead, 3 weeks before the wedding, Mrs. Patterson handed me a stark black and white server's uniform. "You will enter through the service doors," she told me, her tone flat and uncompromising. "You will pass out champagne. You will not speak to the guests, and you will certainly not tell anyone you live here. You are the hired help. Do not embarrass us." I took the uniform. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I simply nodded. I had no idea that putting on that degrading uniform and walking into the rehearsal dinner the next night would be the exact catalyst that would obliterate the Patterson family's empire forever. When Mrs. Patterson tore my nursing school acceptance, letter into pieces, and let it fall to the freshly polished hardwood floor, she smiled with the smug, arrogant satisfaction of a woman who thought she had finally broken a wild horse. She genuinely believed that by destroying that piece of paper, she had permanently locked me in my designated cage. She expected me to cry, surrender, and spend the rest of my miserable life quietly scrubbing her Italian marble countertops. But she severely underestimated the terrifying power of a girl who has absolutely nothing left to lose. What the Pattersons didn't realize was that they hadn't broken me. They had simply taught me a highly valuable lesson. Never ask your captors for permission to escape. I didn't give up. Instead, I stripped my life down to the absolute, agonizing bare minimum and took my survival entirely underground. It started a week after the incident in the study. Chase, in a fit of rage after losing a video game, had smashed a glass of water over his expensive MacBook Pro. Mr. Patterson simply threw it in the trash and bought him a newer model the very next morning. That night, after the house went completely dark, I crept out to the garage, dug the sticky, water-damaged laptop out of the garbage bin, and smuggled it down into the basement. I had no money to fix it, but I had desperation. Whenever I was sent to the grocery store, I would sprint the extra mile to the public library, using their computers to frantically memorize YouTube tutorials on logic board repair. I used a stolen pair of tweezers and a cheap soldering iron I bought with spare laundry change to painstakingly clean the corrosion off the motherboard in the dead of night. It took me 3 months, but one night, sitting on my mildewed mattress in the freezing basement, the Apple logo illuminated the darkness. I hacked into the unprotected Wi-Fi network of the wealthy cardiologists next door, and suddenly the entire world was at my fingertips. Because I had no legal identification, I couldn't get a traditional job. So, I built a fake persona. I created an LLC in Wyoming using an online registered agent. I opened a digital business bank account. And then, the absolute bone-crushing grind began. My 20s were not spent going to college parties, hanging out with friends, or figuring out who I was. My early 20s were a brutal, unending war for independence, fought entirely in the shadows. Every day, my alarm would go off at 5:00 a.m. I would spend 14 grueling hours playing the perfect, submissive servant. I scrubbed floors until my knuckles bled, did endless loads of laundry, and prepared gourmet meals for a family that wouldn't even look me in the eye. But at 11:00 p.m., when the Pattersons finally went to sleep, my real life began. I would pull the laptop from its hiding spot inside the drop ceiling of the basement. From 11:00 p.m. to 4:00 a.m., I worked like a machine. I started at the absolute bottom, transcribing audio files for pennies, doing virtual data entry, and writing SEO blog posts for overseas clients who didn't require a social security number. I functioned on a maximum of 1 to 2 hours of sleep a night. I was a walking ghost, fueled by sheer, unadulterated spite. There were nights I would sit on the edge of my mattress, shivering in the winter cold, my fingers cramping so badly I could barely type. The sheer physical exhaustion would bring me to tears. I would listen to the footsteps of Chase coming home drunk from a luxury nightclub at 3:00 a.m., knowing his entire life was funded by his father's credit card, and I would just type harder. Slowly, agonizingly, the pennies turned into dollars. The dollars turned into thousands. I realized I had a natural, aggressive talent for digital marketing and e-commerce. I stopped working hourly freelance gigs and started building my own online businesses. I taught myself coding, digital ad scaling, and dropshipping logistics. I launched an online consulting agency that specialized in scaling boutique brands. Because I hid behind a corporate logo and a synthesized voice for client calls, no one ever knew they were paying premium retainers to a 21-year-old girl sitting in a concrete basement. Within 4 years, my agency absolutely exploded. At 22 years old, the girl who was told she was too stupid for community college was the sole owner of a company generating over $100,000 a month in pure profit. I had amassed a massive, multi-million-dollar investment portfolio. I legally purchased 2 investment properties on the West Coast under my LLC. I had achieved a level of brilliant, self-made wealth that completely eclipsed Mr. Patterson's traditional Wall Street salary. But I kept it an absolute, airtight secret. During the day, I was still Lily, the worthless servant. I continued to wear the same 3 faded, oversized dresses. When the armpits tore, I meticulously sewed them back together, intentionally making myself look as pathetic and destitute as possible. I let Mrs. Patterson mock my worn-out shoes. I let Chase sneer at my unbrushed hair. The psychological power of this deception was intoxicating. Mrs. Patterson would stand in the kitchen in her $4,000 designer outfit, berating me for using the wrong silver polish, completely unaware that the girl scrubbing her sink could literally buy her house in cash and evict her tomorrow. You might be wondering, if you were a millionaire, why didn't you just leave? Because escaping wasn't enough for me anymore. The Pattersons had kept me hostage for 2 decades by weaponizing my lack of identity. They had threatened that if I ever ran, the police would lock me up as an undocumented vagrant. So, I used my secret wealth to hire the most ruthless, high-end private investigator in Connecticut. For 2 years, I paid him to quietly dig into the Pattersons' past, tracking down the exact origins of my fake adoption, documenting the financial paper trail, and building an airtight, undeniable federal case for human trafficking and forced labor. I wasn't just planning to leave. I was meticulously planning to destroy them. I was waiting for the perfect, most public moment to detonate the bomb I had built under their perfect suburban lives. And then, Chase proposed to Victoria Whitmore. When Mrs. Patterson handed me that stark black and white server's uniform 3 weeks before the wedding, ordering me to use the service entrance and stay invisible, I just nodded and took it. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I walked down to my basement, hung the cheap uniform on the back of the door, and smiled. I opened my laptop, transferred another $50,000 into my offshore investment account, and prepared for war. I knew that putting on that degrading uniform and walking into the Greenwich Country Club for the rehearsal dinner would be the final time I ever played the servant. But even with all my planning, all my money, and all my secret investigations, I was completely unprepared for what was actually going to happen when I stepped onto that terrace. I thought I knew the whole truth about who I was. I had absolutely no idea that the billionaire father of the bride was about to hand me the missing piece of the puzzle that would change my life forever. The Greenwich Country Club was a master class in intimidating, old money opulence. Crystal chandeliers dripped from the vaulted ceilings, a live string quartet played softly in the corner, and the terrace overlooked a pristine, moonlit golf course. I moved through the sea of designer gowns and bespoke tuxedos like a ghost, wearing my cheap, stiff, black and white server's uniform. I carried a heavy silver tray of champagne flutes, my eyes fixed firmly on the floor, just as Mrs. Patterson had ordered. At the center of the terrace, holding court near a massive floral arrangement, was Mr. Patterson. He was surrounded by a circle of Connecticut's most elite billionaires, including the bride's father, Richard Whitmore. Chase stood right next to Mr. Patterson, swirling a glass of expensive scotch, wearing a smug, self-satisfied grin. I was circulating near the edge of their group when Mr. Patterson's booming voice carried over the ambient music. He was in full salesman mode, desperately trying to elevate his family's status in front of the Whitmore empire. Chase is an absolute visionary, Richard, Mr. Patterson boasted, clapping a heavy hand onto Chase's shoulder. He's stepping in as vice president of my firm next month. The boy has a killer instinct for business. He's the entire future of the Patterson legacy. I've always said, you can't teach that kind of brilliance, it's in the blood. Richard Whitmore, a silver-haired, imposing man who commanded the room effortlessly, took a slow sip of his drink. He looked politely unimpressed. Is that so? Because the real estate market is shifting, Robert. I'm currently looking to acquire a digital consulting firm to modernize my portfolio. There's a boutique agency out of Wyoming, Echelon Digital. They scaled a competitor's revenue by 400% in a single quarter. I've been trying to track down the founder for months, but they operate entirely anonymously. Now that is brilliance. Mr. Patterson laughed dismissively. Anonymous founders are usually just hiding a lack of experience. You should let Chase take a look at your portfolio, Richard. He has an unparalleled work ethic. Right at that moment, Chase noticed me standing a few feet away. His eyes gleamed with that familiar, cruel entitlement. He snapped his fingers at me like I was a dog. "Hey, you!" Chase barked loudly, drawing the attention of the entire billionaire circle. "Bring that tray over here. My glass is empty." I stepped forward, keeping my head down, and offered the tray. Chase took a flute, but as he did, he intentionally bumped my wrist. A splash of champagne spilled over the edge of a glass, landing directly on Mr. Patterson's polished Italian leather shoe. Mr. Patterson's face flushed with instant, venomous rage. "You clumsy, worthless idiot." Mr. Patterson hissed, snatching a napkin from the tray and violently throwing it at my chest. He turned to Richard Whitmore, offering an embarrassed, patronizing laugh. "I am so terribly sorry, Richard. Please excuse the hired help. She is a charity case we took pity on years ago. She doesn't have a single brain cell in her head. Honestly, she's lucky we put a roof over her head, considering she is entirely incapable of making anything of herself." Chase snickered. "She's practically a high school dropout, Mr. Whitmore. Some people are just born for the bottom of the food chain." The sheer, blinding arrogance of their words echoed in the sudden silence of the circle. I looked at the napkin that had fluttered to the floor. I looked at Mr. Patterson's furious, condescending face. And then, the 23 years of terror, submission, and silence completely evaporated from my body. I didn't cower. I didn't apologize. I set the heavy silver tray down on a nearby cocktail table with a loud, ringing clack. I straightened my spine, pulled my shoulders back, and looked directly into the eyes of Richard Whitmore. "Actually, Mr. Whitmore," I said, my voice ringing out clear, steady, and commanding, cutting through the jazz music like a knife. Echelon Digital scaled that competitor's revenue by 420%. And we did it by restructuring their completely bloated offshore logistics funnel. The entire circle of billionaires froze. Mr. Patterson's jaw dropped. "What did you just say?" Richard Whitmore breathed, taking a sudden step forward, his eyes locked onto mine. "Lily, shut your mouth." "Mrs. Patterson hissed, materializing from the crowd and grabbing my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "Have you lost your mind? Apologize and get back to the kitchen immediately." I smoothly ripped my arm out of her grasp. "I am the founder and sole owner of Echelon Digital, Mr. Whitmore," I continued, ignoring the Pattersons completely. I reached into the pocket of my cheap apron and pulled out my smartphone. I opened my encrypted banking app and the master administrative dashboard for Echelon, turning the screen so Richard could see the live, multi-million-dollar revenue streams and the Wyoming LLC documents bearing my digital signature. Richard Whitmore adjusted his glasses, staring at the screen in absolute shock. "This is impossible, Mr. Patterson stammered, his face turning an ashen, sickly gray as he looked at the numbers on my phone. He looked at me as if I had just grown a second head. You live in my basement. You scrub my floors." "I scrubbed your floors to survive, Robert," I said, dropping the Mr. Patterson title for the first time in my life. The crowd around us began to murmur, sensing the massive shift in power. You told me I was a liability. You told me my education was a waste of money. So I taught myself how to code on a water-damaged laptop you threw in the garbage. I built an empire in the dead of night while your visionary son was blowing his allowance on bottle service at nightclubs. I turned my gaze to Chase, who was physically shrinking backward, the arrogant smirk completely wiped from his face. Chase doesn't have a killer instinct for business, I announced, my voice echoing across the now dead silent terrace. He is 24 years old and has never earned a single dollar in his entire life. He is a fraud, funded entirely by a father who is so desperate to buy a legacy that he completely ignored the multimillionaire living directly under his feet. The absolute devastation in the circle was palpable. The wealthy elites were whispering fervently, completely revolted by Mr. Patterson's behavior. Victoria Whitmore, standing a few feet away, looked at Chase with sheer disgust. The golden child narrative had just been publicly, violently slaughtered. But as the Pattersons stood there, paralyzed by the public humiliation of realizing their worthless servant was exponentially wealthier and more successful than they would ever be, something else was happening. Richard Whitmore wasn't looking at my phone screen anymore. As I stood there, no longer hunched over, no longer hiding in the shadows, but standing in the bright light of the terrace with my head held high, Richard was staring directly at my face. The color rapidly drained from his cheeks. His champagne glass slipped from his fingers, shattering against the stone patio. "My God," Richard whispered, his voice trembling so violently it sounded like it was being torn from his throat. He ignored the business documents. He ignored the Pattersons' panicked stammering. He took a slow, unsteady step toward me, his eyes frantically scanning the shape of my jaw, the bridge of my nose, and finally locking onto my eyes. "Your eyes," he choked out, tears suddenly welling over his lower lashes. "They're emerald green." "Mr. Whitmore?" I asked, suddenly feeling a strange, deep flutter of panic in my chest. Richard reached into his tailored suit jacket with shaking hands. He pulled out a worn, faded photograph and held it out to me. "What did you say your name was?" "Lily," I whispered. He stepped close enough that I could see the profound, agonizing grief etched into every line on his face. "Lily," Richard said, his voice breaking as the final, devastating piece of the 23-year puzzle snapped into place. "Do you know who your real mother is?" I stood frozen on the country club terrace, the distant jazz music completely drowned out by the roaring blood in my ears. Richard Whitmore's hands were shaking so violently that the faded photograph he held fluttered like a dry leaf. I looked down at the picture. It was a young woman with a radiant, tired smile, holding a newborn baby wrapped in a pink blanket. The woman had my exact jawline, my exact nose, and my exact, unmistakable emerald green eyes. "This is my sister, Margaret," Richard whispered, the tears freely tracking down his cheeks. 23 years ago, her baby was kidnapped from the hospital nursery. Margaret spent 5 years working with the FBI to find her. She died of a broken heart when the baby would have turned 5. He looked up at me, his billionaire facade completely stripped away, leaving only a desperate, grieving uncle. "Her baby's name was Lily Ashford Whitmore. Please, let me take a DNA sample, if I am right. The people standing behind you are not your family. They are the monsters who stole you." The world tilted on its axis. I didn't hesitate. I gave him the swab. And 72 hours later, sitting in a private, heavily secured room at Richard's estate, I read the certified laboratory report. Probability of relationship, 99, 97%. I wasn't a worthless charity case. I wasn't born to serve. I was Lily Ashford Whitmore, the sole heir to a $12 million trust fund, set up by a mother who had loved me so much that losing me literally stopped her heart. And the people who had starved me, beaten me, and locked me in a concrete basement hadn't saved me. They had bought me. The trap is set. 1 week later, Richard Whitmore invited the Patterson family to his sprawling, 12-bedroom Greenwich estate. The official reason for the meeting was to discuss a massive financial merger and secure Chase's future. Mr. Patterson was absolutely ecstatic. He believed that the embarrassing incident on the terrace had blown over, assuming my digital marketing company was just a fluke that Richard was willing to overlook in favor of old money connections. When the Pattersons arrived, I was already there, standing quietly in the corner of Richard's cavernous, mahogany-lined study. Mr. Patterson strutted into the room wearing his best-tailored suit, projecting absolute arrogance. Mrs. Patterson was dripping in diamonds and wearing a pale blue Armani pantsuit. Chase walked in hand with Victoria, flashing his signature, entitled smirk. He genuinely believed he was about to be handed the keys to the Whitmore empire. "Richard, my friend," Mr. Patterson boomed, opening his arms. "What a beautiful home. Chase has been up all night preparing his portfolio for you." Richard didn't smile. He sat behind his massive desk, folding his hands. Victoria stood rigidly by the fireplace, her arms crossed, refusing to look at Chase. "Before we discuss any investments, Robert," Richard said, his voice terrifyingly calm, "Victoria and I had our forensic accountants do a routine audit of Chase's assets. Just standard procedure before bringing him into the family business." Chase's arrogant smirk instantly faltered. He swallowed hard. "An audit? Sir, I told you my assets are tied up in." "You have no assets, Chase," Richard interrupted smoothly, dropping a thick manila folder onto the desk. "You are 24 years old. You have zero verified income. You have $85,000 in credit card debt that your father has been secretly paying off. The lucrative, real estate flip you bragged to my daughter about was actually fully funded by a high-interest loan you defaulted on last week. You aren't a visionary. You are a broke, unemployable fraud." Victoria turned to Chase, her face twisted in pure, unadulterated revulsion. "You lied to me," she spat. "You told me you bought our new house in cash. You're completely bankrupt." "Victoria, babe, please, I can explain." Chase stammered, desperately reaching for her hand. She violently slapped his hand away. "Don't touch me. I am not marrying a pathetic liar who needs his daddy to pay off his bar tabs. The engagement is over. We are done." She pulled the 2-carat diamond ring off her finger and threw it hard at Chase's chest. It hit him and bounced onto the Persian rug. The golden child, the boy who was promised the world, physically crumbled, dropping to his knees to desperately search for the ring as his entire fake life disintegrated in seconds. The fall of the patriarch. Mr. Patterson stepped forward, his face flushed with panic and rage. "Richard, this is an outrage. How dare you humiliate my son? We are family." "We are absolutely not family." Richard's voice dropped to a lethal, icy register. He opened his desk drawer and pulled out 2 pieces of paper. "Speaking of family, Robert, I had my attorneys pull the county records. There is no adoption paperwork on file for anyone named Lily Patterson. No birth certificate. No social security number. So, I have one question for you. Where did you get her?" "Mrs. Patterson's Armani-clad shoulders went rigid, the color completely drained from her face. "There was a fire," she lied, her voice pitching up in panic. "The records were lost years ago. We adopted her legally." "There was no fire," Richard snapped. He threw the DNA test and a massive, red-stamped FBI cold case file onto the desk. "She is my biological niece. You didn't adopt her. You purchased her from a black market trafficking ring in 2003 for $15,000 so you could have a free, disposable servant." The silence in the room was so heavy it felt like it could crush bone. Mr. Patterson stumbled backward, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. He looked at the FBI file. He looked at Richard. And then he looked at me. The absolute terror in his eyes was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. The heavy oak doors of the study suddenly burst open. 4 armed FBI agents in tactical gear flooded into the room. "Robert and Donna Patterson, you are under arrest for human trafficking, document fraud, and felony child endangerment." "No, wait," Mr. Patterson shrieked, his patriarchal pride instantly crumbling into pathetic cowardice. He tried to run for the side door, but an agent tackled him, slamming the arrogant millionaire face first against the mahogany wall. The cold click of handcuffs echoed through the room. Mrs. Patterson completely lost her mind. The poised, vicious woman who had terrorized me for 2 decades collapsed onto her knees. Her designer clothes wrinkled against the floor as she crawled toward me, tears streaming through her expensive makeup. "Lily, Lily, please," she wailed hysterically, grabbing at the hem of my dress. "Tell them it's a mistake. We gave you a roof over your head. We fed you. We kept you safe. We are your parents. Have mercy, please." I looked down at her. I didn't feel an ounce of pity. "You gave me a concrete floor," I said, my voice as cold and hard as the Italian marble she used to force me to scrub. "You gave me beatings, starvation, and humiliation, but most importantly, you stole my mother from me, and for that, I am going to make sure you rot." I easily pulled my dress from her desperate grip and stepped back. Chase, still kneeling on the floor clutching the discarded engagement ring, watched in absolute, paralyzed horror as federal agents dragged his screaming, sobbing parents out of the mansion. His trust fund was gone. His fiancée was gone. His parents were going to federal prison, and their assets were about to be completely seized by the government. The golden child was left with absolutely nothing, while the servant he had mocked his entire life stood in a billionaire's estate, finally claiming the empire that was always rightfully hers. The news of the Patterson family's arrest hit the wealthy Connecticut suburbs like a seismic shockwave. Overnight, the absolute pinnacle of the American dream was exposed as a horrifying, criminal nightmare. For the next 4 months, my life became an endless blur of federal depositions, meetings with forensic accountants, and intense therapy sessions. During the trial, the full, sickening scope of their crimes was laid bare for the entire world to see. The prosecution proved that Robert and Donna Patterson had paid an underground black market syndicate $15,000 in untraceable cash to purchase me in 2003. They hadn't saved an orphan. They had intentionally bought a human being to use as a permanent, untraceable, and unpaid servant. Sitting in the federal courtroom, I watched the people who had terrorized me for 2 decades completely unravel. Without his bespoke suits and his Wall Street Journal, Robert Patterson was nothing but a fragile, pathetic coward. He wept on the stand, blaming everyone but himself. Donna Patterson, stripped of her designer makeup and Chanel perfumes, looked entirely hollowed out. The judge showed absolutely no mercy. Robert was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison, and Donna was sentenced to 12. Furthermore, the court ordered the immediate seizure of all their assets to pay for restitution and legal fees. The Fairfield County mansion, the house with the pristine Italian marble countertops and the freezing, mildewed concrete basement, was auctioned off to the highest bidder. And then there was Chase. With his parents in federal prison and their bank accounts entirely frozen by the government, the golden child was left with absolutely nothing. Victoria had not only finalized their split, but had slapped him with a restraining order after he repeatedly showed up at the Whitmore estate begging for a handout. Chase, a 24-year-old man with no college degree, no actual work experience, and a permanently ruined reputation, was forced to move into a tiny, run-down apartment on the wrong side of the tracks. He was entirely cut off from the high society world that had defined his entire existence. 6 months after the sentencing, I was sitting in my private suite at Richard's estate. It was a beautiful, sunlit room with massive windows overlooking a lush rose garden. I was drinking a cup of coffee that I hadn't been forced to brew at 5:00 a.m. My cell phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. I answered it, expecting a call from my lawyers. Instead, a thin, desperate voice crackled through the speaker. "Lily, please, please don't hang up, it's Chase." I didn't gasp, my heart didn't race. The sheer, blinding panic that used to seize my chest whenever he spoke to me was completely gone. I leaned back in my plush chair and watched a robin land on the windowsill. "How did you get this number, Chase?" I asked. My voice was perfectly calm, devoid of any warmth or anger. I begged one of Dad's old defense attorneys for it," he stammered, his voice trembling. He sounded absolutely exhausted. "Lily, you have to help me. I have nothing. I'm working minimum wage at a grocery store, and I'm 2 months behind on rent. They're going to evict me next week. I can't afford groceries. I'm sleeping on a mattress on the floor. The absolute irony of his situation was not lost on me. He was finally experiencing a fraction of the life his family had forced me to live for 23 years. That sounds difficult, I replied evenly. Lily, I know you have the $12 million trust fund. I saw the articles about your digital marketing company. You're a multimillionaire. Chase's voice pitched up into a desperate whine. I just need a loan, $50,000. That's pocket change for you. Or you could hire me at your company. We grew up in the same house. We're practically family. You owe me this much after what your uncle did to my parents. I closed my eyes, taking a slow, deep breath. For my entire life, society and media had conditioned me to believe that forgiveness is the ultimate requirement for healing. We are taught to turn the other cheek, to extend an olive branch, to be the bigger person. Chase was banking on that exact societal guilt. He was hoping that the traumatized, submissive girl who used to scrub his floors would take pity on him. But I was no longer that girl. We are not family, Chase, I stated, setting a boundary so firm and absolute that it could have been carved out of steel. And I do not owe you a single cent. You can't just leave me to starve. He cried out defensively. It wasn't my fault. I was just a kid when they bought you. I didn't know you were kidnapped. You didn't know I was kidnapped, I agreed calmly. But you knew I was a human being, and that should have been enough. Chase went completely silent on the other end of the line. You watched them starve me, I continued, my tone uncompromising and clinical. You watched them lock me in a freezing basement. You sat on the couch and laughed when your mother ripped up my nursing school acceptance letter. You intentionally spilled champagne on me to humiliate me in front of billionaires. You didn't just witness my abuse, Chase. You actively participated in it because it made you feel powerful. I was raised that way. He sobbed, grasping at straws. I didn't know any better. You are 24 years old. Ignorance is no longer an excuse for cruelty, I replied. I am not going to bail you out. I am not going to hire you. I am not going to save you from the consequences of your own arrogance. You are finally experiencing the exact life you told me I deserved, and you are going to figure it out entirely on your own. Lily, please, he begged, completely breaking down. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. I don't need your apology, Chase, I said softly, because your opinion of me is officially worthless. Do not ever call this number again. I pulled the phone away from my ear, hit the red button, and immediately blocked the number. I set the phone face down on the table and exhaled. I didn't feel a surge of vindictive joy, but I didn't feel any guilt either. I simply felt an overwhelming, impenetrable peace. I walked over to the antique mirror hanging on the wall of my suite and looked at my reflection. For 23 years, I had searched the eyes of the Patterson family, desperately looking for a shred of validation. I had believed that my worth was defined by how well I served them, how invisible I could make myself, and whether or not they approved of my existence. But as I looked at my emerald green eyes, the exact same eyes as the mother who had loved me, I finally understood the truth. My self-worth was not up for negotiation. It did not require an apology from my abusers, and it absolutely did not require their validation. By refusing to save the golden child, I wasn't being cruel. I was radically, unapologetically protecting the woman I had fought so hard to become. I had drawn a line in the sand, and for the first time in my life, I was the one holding the pen. It has been exactly 2 years since that phone call with Chase. I never heard from him again. I heard through the grapevine that he eventually moved out of state, working odd jobs, permanently exiled from the billionaire lifestyle he once thought was his birthright. Robert and Donna Patterson are still sitting in federal prison. I never went to visit them. I didn't need to look them in the eye to find closure, because my closure was the life I built without them. Today, I am not scrubbing floors. I am in my junior year at Yale University, studying psychology. I want to spend the rest of my life working with survivors of human trafficking and extreme domestic abuse, helping people find their way out of the exact darkness I was forced to grow up in. On my desk, right next to my textbooks, sits a framed copy of my real birth certificate. Lily Ashford Whitmore. And tucked behind it is the photograph of the mother who loved me so much it broke her heart. A message to you. I want to break the fourth wall for a moment and speak directly to you through the screen. I know exactly why many of you clicked on this video and stayed until the very end. If you are watching this right now, and you are trapped in a household where you are made to feel small, disposable, or unloved, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Your value is not determined by the people who are too blind to see it. For 23 years, I believed that I was fundamentally broken. I believed that because the people who were supposed to be my parents treated me like a burden, I must have been born to be one. But abuse is not a reflection of your worth. It is a reflection of your abuser's brokenness. You cannot earn the love of toxic people by shrinking yourself, by working harder, or by suffering in silence. Family is not just a biological coincidence, and sharing a roof with someone does not give them a free pass to destroy your peace. If the people raising you refuse to treat you with basic human dignity, you have the absolute right to walk away and build a family of your own choosing. Today, my family is my Uncle Richard, the incredible friends I've made at university, and the beautiful, supportive community I have chosen for myself. Independence is the ultimate revenge. Realizing that your self-worth does not require the validation of your abusers is the most terrifying and liberating awakening you will ever experience. It takes immense courage to set that boundary, to walk out that door, and to say, I deserve better. But I promise you, the freedom waiting on the other side of that boundary is entirely worth the fight. Join the conversation. Thank you so much for staying with me until the very end of this journey. It wasn't an easy story to tell, but keeping toxic secrets in the dark only protects the monsters who put them there. Now, I want to turn it over to you. Have you ever had to set a firm, non-negotiable boundary with a toxic family member? What was the breaking point that finally made you realize your own worth? Please, drop your story in the comments below. I ask this not just because the YouTube algorithm loves engagement, but because our community desperately needs to hear from you. Someone reading the comments today might be sitting in their own dark basement, desperately needing to see your story to find the courage to walk away. We heal by sharing our truths, and your voice matters. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories about resilience, standing your ground, and reclaiming your life. Check the description for another video I think you'll connect with. Until next time, remember your worth, protect your peace, and I will see you in the next one. The story ends here. Now, let's listen to some music to relax.